Welcome to my channel. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie. I'm Long Island's eating disorder therapist, and I talk all on this channel about eating disorders, body image issues, and general mental health topics that pertain to all of this. If you're interested in that or you think it could be helpful, please consider subscribing to my channel. In today's video, I wanted to talk a bit about boundaries. So boundaries is something that is just such a topic that is always coming up in therapy. I bet you that if you're in therapy, you've certainly heard of boundaries. Boundaries in this day and age is so incredibly crucial on so many levels, and it is probably the hardest time to maintain those boundaries. And boundaries is just such a universal term, and there's so many ways that we need to find our boundaries and assert our boundaries and where we need our boundaries. We need our boundaries in what we share on social media. We need our boundaries with how much information people are entitled to about us. We need our boundaries with work. We need our boundaries with family members and friends and relationships that we have. Believe it or not, we need boundaries with ourselves. Sometimes that is the most important thing that we need to be focusing on. So all in all, it's something that we need to be assessing for ourselves. Like, what are the boundaries that you think that you are letting slide in your life? A big way to try to assess where you might be lacking boundaries is, where are you feeling maybe distress in relationships or just in general in your life? Are you feeling very distressed with work? And then we need to assess it. Of course, there could be other reasons that you are feeling distressed or anxious or whatever that you might be feeling, but then we need to ask yourself some probing questions about that. Okay, let's say I am feeling stressed out about work. Is it because I am struggling with time management? Then that is a boundary thing. That is a boundary that you need to be setting with yourself, figuring out how you can work with time management to be your most efficient and effective self. Are you really struggling with a coworker who keeps asking you questions and you feel the need to share whatever questions they ask, even though it's kind of personal? Maybe they're asking you how much you make. Maybe they're asking you about your personal life. And that coworker, you're just not comfortable with sharing that, but you feel like you have to because we don't want to be rude. It's absolutely okay to be rude if you are finding that your boundaries are consistently being just pushed over when you are trying to assert yourself. Of course, we want to make sure that you are trying to assert yourself first, because you can't really be mad at a person who doesn't necessarily recognize your boundaries, because some people don't have boundaries themselves, so they don't really understand other people's boundaries. So we need to at least give them the chance to see you asserting your boundaries before you get upset with them. I know it's frustrating and I know it's hard, of course, but finding where you feel you need more boundaries in your life is going to be really important. Now, another thing that I wanted to talk about with boundaries is that boundaries tend to be something that is just a bad thing. You find it, that's you don't care about a person. It's kind of a selfish thing to have boundaries. And let me tell you, having boundaries is probably one of the most selfless things that you can do. It is something to help you feel more comfortable as a person. It is something also listening to your intuition. If something is telling you something's wrong, we need to be listening to that. But also, when we are constantly violating our own boundaries, we become less as a person. We become less, and we just feel usually more depressed and more anxious. And then that is something that translates to all the relationships that of the people that you love, the things that you love. It translates to work. It translates to your family. All of that happens. So in a moment, yeah, you're like, yeah, I can definitely do this. Like, yeah, you want me to pick you up at 4 a.m. I know I'm super tired, but you know, it's fine. I can do it. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you have to do something. Now, let me make it clear, that does not mean that you never sacrifice anything for things that you find is worth it or people that you find are worth it. If someone is in a jam and someone that you really care about needs to be picked up at 4 a.m., yes, perhaps that's something that you need to be doing. But when it's every single night that they're asking you that, that's a problem. And that's an example. Yes, boundaries are incredibly important. Sometimes we need to be flexible with those boundaries. Because we can't just say, oh, I'm just never going to help anyone if it doesn't work for my boundaries, because that is something that is also not very nice. But it's a balance. Everything is a balance, and I know that that's probably one of the most frustrating things, because instead of it just being a very clear-cut thing, we always have to kind of assess it. But here's kind of the balance there, is that most times whenever you know your boundaries and you assert them, the best rule of thumb is to assert it and continue that we're not crossing those boundaries except in exceptional situations. And sometimes that exceptional situation would also include an exceptional person. Perhaps you wouldn't do that for an acquaintance, but perhaps you would do it for your best friend or your brother or your sister or whoever. So it's always important to find that balance, and it's going to be a game for a while, figuring it out. Just view it that way if that's helpful for you, and use it as a self-exploration tool. It's kind of cool when you can learn what is something that is a helpful thing for you, what is something that's a helpful boundary versus an unhelpful, and trying to figure that out for yourself. And then, yes, it might be uncomfortable asserting it, especially if you've had it so many times where people have crossed those boundaries and they might feel a little weird about you starting to enforce boundaries. It is going to be a little bit of an uncomfortable transition, but it's a transition that's going to be well worth it in the long run. So I'd love to hear about your experience with boundaries, if you've ever really tried to break into setting those boundaries and enforcing those boundaries, and how that experience is like for you. If you have any tips or advice for anyone else who's starting out in this process, please let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear about them. I hope you found this video helpful or informative. If you did, please consider giving it a thumbs up and sharing it with anyone else who you think could be finding it helpful. And as always, I hope that it's a wonderful time trying to find your state of balance. And I'll see you in my next video.